Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. We're here today with Brad Warner, who's here to share with us his new book, The Other Side of Nothing, The Zen Ethics of Time, Space, and Being. Now, many of you know Brad. He's been on the show before. He's the author of numerous books. He's a Soto Zen teacher, plays in a punk rock band. He's a filmmaker and popular blogger who leads workshops and retreats around the world. So let's welcome to the show, Brad Warner.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, hey, it's so great to have you here again to talk about your new book. So The Other Side of Nothing, what does that even mean?
Well, it's based on a quote from a guy named Kobun Chino Otogawa Roshi. He was a Zen teacher who came to the US in the 60s, and he was the teacher of my first Zen teacher. And he has a quote that I used actually in not just this book. I think I've used it in 3 different books so far, which says, when you flip over to the other side of nothing, you are held by the hand of the absolute. And I just thought that was a lovely quote, even though it's a little bit hard to understand. But he's talking about kind of understanding there's 2 sides to human experience, which is the side that is the individual and I am me and you are you and never the twain shall meet or whatever. But there's also this other side that's very open, in which we are connected with everything. And Kobun used the phrase the other side of nothing to refer to understanding both sides, our individual side and our more universal side.
So is that what inspired you to write this book, was having that information?
Well, that was part of the inspiration. I felt like I wanted to write a book about Buddhist ethics because I felt that I've always been interested in ethics and trying to lead an ethical life and lead a good life. And I feel like there's a general yearning for that. I don't know if I even like the word yearning, but people kind of want to learn to live an ethical life, but instead they're kind of finding slogans and movements and things to join. But Buddhist ethics is quite different, and it's based on this understanding of non-duality, which is another word I don't particularly love, but it's this understanding of universal oneness. So if you can understand universal oneness, you see that the best thing you can do for yourself as well as anyone else is to lead an ethical life. And that was the impetus for writing the book.
So when you talk about universal oneness for people who are new to Buddhism or this approach, are you talking about how we are part of everything? How would you explain that?
It's difficult to explain, but yeah, it's how we are part of everything. One analogy I used in the book and I've used elsewhere is the idea of a puzzle piece. It's one of the ways I like to think of what we are in relation to the universe. So if you make a puzzle, every piece of the puzzle has to be exactly what it is. It has to be a certain size, a certain color, a certain shape, certain form in order to fit the puzzle. And if it doesn't fit the puzzle, it doesn't work. And so as individuals, we have to be exactly who we are in order to fit in the sort of universal puzzle. But we're just a piece that completes the bigger picture. So the individuality is a real thing and something we need to pay attention to, but it's usually for most people the only thing we pay attention to. And I think what we really need to do is pay attention to both, pay attention to who we are and being exactly who we are, but also to how that fits into the bigger picture.
So when you talk about ethics, and especially when we talk about Zen ethics, what did those look like?
Well, fundamentally in Buddhism, when Buddhism first started, the first sermon that the Buddha supposedly gave was about the Noble Eightfold Path. And I can never remember all eight folds of the path, but they're like right speech, right understanding, right livelihood is one of them, right action, basically just doing the right thing at the right moment. And further on in the development of Buddhism, you have what are called the 10 precepts, which are quite similar. I think I counted 4 or 5 of them, which are pretty much the same as the 10 commandments. So very simple sort of ethical things. Don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat. One of the Buddhist ones is don't give way to anger. That isn't in the 10 commandments, but it's a really nice one. And so it's a very kind of basic, fundamental moral and ethical framework that kind of everybody learns. But the difference with Buddhism is that it's based on this idea of a universal connectedness with all things. And so that means that you don't just go by the letter of the precepts or the letter of the Noble Eightfold Path. You actually try to fit into the moment. And there are rare moments when the best thing to do ethically is a violation of the precepts. Those don't come along very often, but they do come along. And it's why the Buddhist path asks you to be flexible at every moment, which is why we do a meditation practice in order to kind of learn to fit in with the moment in which we exist.
Well, I love how the actual cover of the book is, because it's very much you. I mean, when you talk about, it's a punk Buddha, basically, is what you have. And I really appreciate that, because it looks at Buddha in a different way, and how we can incorporate Buddha as someone that is part of us.
Yeah. Well, that character that appears on the cover, he's appeared on the cover of several of my books, and it's the invention of this artist named Johnny Crap, who lives in, I think he goes by I've forgotten what his actual last name is, but he goes by that lately, I think. Anyway, he's a Montreal-based artist who did a poster for an event I did in Canada, in Montreal, in 2004 or 5, I think. And so he's been doing a lot of my book covers, and I come from that sort of punk rock scene. I was the bass player of a band called Zero Defects, a hardcore punk band, when I first discovered Buddhism in my late teens, in the early 80s. And I'm still a member of that band. We don't play that often. We play about once a year, and we're negotiating when we're going to play this year. I don't know when it's going to be. But I felt that the punk rock scene that I was part of back in those days was a very ethically based. I think a lot of people who are not part of the punk rock thing don't really know that about certain strains. There's all kinds of variations of punk rock, especially these days since it's been around so long. But one of the variations is this idea of straight edge, where you're trying to be very ethical. No drinking, no drugs, no what do they call, meaningless sex. You're trying to live a good life and still be into this sort of musical movement. And I felt that was very close to what the Buddhists are all about, although the Buddhists are a little quieter with it.
I like that analogy there, because they are a little bit more quiet with it. But I love how you bring it into a place where people that maybe we are loud, and maybe we are trying to express ourselves in different ways, not as a Buddhist monk, but really as people here walking the planet, and how we can incorporate these ideas into our life.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. I think everybody has a different approach. Everybody who practices this practice has a different way of understanding it and a different way of manifesting it in their own life. And I think that's really important. I was actually just reading I do a YouTube channel, and I'm planning to do a video about this later today, but it was a passage where Dogen, who's the founder of the form of Buddhism that I study, was saying that his phrase is, not every practitioner has golden bones, which was his way of saying we're not all perfect. And in fact, he goes on to say that some of the practitioners, the early practitioners of Buddhism, were also kind of terrible people. He brings this up, and that Buddhism is not the way of saints. That's how one Buddhist teacher, a contemporary Buddhist teacher, put it. He said, Buddhism is not the way of saints, but sometimes it's good to imitate their behavior, which I think is really a wonderful way of putting it. So we're not saints, but we kind of think it might be a good idea to try to imitate the behavior of saints as best we can without any golden bones to hold us up.
I think that applies to a lot of us. I mean, who can walk that path? And, very few of us are Buddha or Mother Teresa or whoever, but it was interesting. I really was so impressed with your book because you bring all this stuff together, and you touch on stuff that I was really kind of shocked by, because you starting to ask people, like, can you do what's right without belief? And I think maybe some people are going, well, I'm an atheist, so I don't really need to pay attention to any of this.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to bring up, because usually it's kind of presented that way, that doing what's right is dependent upon your belief, like a belief system. And most religions are based on belief. And that I found, I didn't grow up atheist, but I grew up in a kind of family that was a-religious. Nobody really cared about religion. I think that's sort of typical for a lot of people these days. And so I didn't have a belief system to fall back on. I didn't believe God was going to punish me if I did wrong or something like that. And I think the Buddhist system is also based on that, because there's no, it's arguable, and somebody might want to argue with me about this, but I say that there's no belief in the supernatural in Buddhism. Everything is fundamentally the workings of cause and effect, is how the Buddhists put it. So it means that everything has a kind of a rational explanation if you look hard enough. But it also takes in this idea that there are forces out there that are kind of beyond our understanding. So even though everything might have a rational explanation, there might be some rational explanations that humans will never understand because we're just not equipped to. So it doesn't really matter whether you believe in God or anything else. You just do what's right at this moment. That was kind of Dogen's big message.
Well, one chapter really stood out for me, and I'm sure a lot of people are going, well, wait a minute, what's this about? And it's Who Walked My Dog? So can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, that's my own personal favorite chapter, and I actually wrote it. It says it in the chapter. It's exactly what it's advertised. I got a dog a few months before I started writing this book in earnest. A rescue dog. He was about 3 years old when we got him. And so now I had this new thing in my life where I had to go walk the dog a few times a day. And I took a break from writing. And as I was walking around, I started thinking, well, who is walking my dog? And it's a fundamental question that comes up in Buddhism and some of the Hindu traditions, and even some of the Christian and Islamic traditions ask this, which is, who am I? What am I? And that is my fundamental question. And I think most of us sort of take it for granted that I exist, whoever we're using I to refer to. And certainly that does seem to be the case, but we don't know what this person is. And in that chapter, I just kind of run through every answer I can think of as to who I am. And every answer, spoiler alert, every answer I come up with doesn't work. And so the fundamental question of who am I is unanswerable, which is kind of, I think when I first came across that, I was like, what do you mean it's unanswerable? I know who I am. But the more I started to look at it, I thought, I don't know who I am.
I can understand. Well, and it dovetails really nicely with this, because you often hear people talk about, well, I don't know what my life purpose is. I don't know what I'm here, what I'm supposed to be doing. I mean, what's the purpose? And you kind of address that in a couple of your chapters in a different way.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and it was the question that started me out on this path. a young person, and I think I was a child when I first started coming up with these questions of what is my purpose in life, and what am I doing here, and what's the best way to do what I need to do. And I think the only answer I've come up with is it comes up moment by moment. So there isn't really this overriding fundamental purpose that you could pin down in words. It's just, here I am, and here is this situation I'm facing. I'm doing an interview. What do I do when I'm doing an interview? What's the best interview I can do? Whatever it is. The Zen Buddhists love to get a little bit R-rated with this, which I won't do for you. But they'll say, what is the best way to use the toilet, for example? A Dogen writes extensively about the best way to use the toilet, which I think is a remarkable thing, because he's this deep philosophical thinker who has a lot of writings on a whole variety of subjects, but he spends 2 different chapters of his major masterwork on how to use the toilet. So the fundamental answer of our purpose is, when we're doing something, to do exactly that thing as purely as possible, and do nothing else. Just devote yourself in that moment to the thing that needs to be done right now, even if it's going to the toilet.
Even something like that. Well, and the subtitle of your book is The Zen Ethics of Time, Space, and Being. So let's talk about the time and space. How did that get incorporated into this book?
Well, it's something that I'm personally really interested in. Dogen, I keep referencing him. He's a 13th century Buddhist monk and writer who founded, as I said, the form of Buddhism that I've been studying all these years. And he writes, he has a very famous chapter called Uji, which is usually translated as being time. And he says time and being are the same thing. And he also has, I think, 2 different chapters devoted to the concept of space. And Buddhists will say weird things like time and space are an illusion. And I think most of us, I know when I first encountered that, I went, what do you mean by that? Because time is obviously real, and space is, obviously real. I can see that there's space between me and the microphone that I'm talking into, for example, or that it takes time to do this interview, or whatever it is that you're referring to. But I wanted to dig into what Dogen meant by his insistence that time and space are illusory, or at least not what we think they are. And I think it's fascinating that it's very hard to give a kind of short answer, but he says that they're both aspects of ourselves. So time is usually we think of as being outside of ourselves, and space would be maybe the very definition of space might be, or one of the definitions might be, that which is outside of myself. But he says, no, they're fundamentally parts of self. But when Dogen uses the word self, he's talking about something much, much bigger than the individual sort of ego-based self that we usually think of as self. But gosh, it is difficult to give it in a really short version. I don't want to give you a giant lecture about the time and space, but I think those ideas are fascinating. And I thought, well, he thought it was worth writing. I'm going to try to see if I can give my take on what he wrote, as well as I bring in a lot of other people in the book. I've done a few books that were centered on Dogen because he's my favorite sort of Buddhist philosopher and writer. But in this book, I brought in some other perspectives that I think are quite similar to his, and tried to kind of fuse all that together.
Bring that all together. Well, and I appreciate you. I know these are in-depth topics. So I do
Yeah.
appreciate you diving into it the way that you are. And when we talk about superconsciousness and miracles, how do they tie into all of this?
Well, Dogen has another, I hate to keep talking about the same guy all the time, but one of his really interesting chapters is called Miracles. And he he does this interesting thing. A lot of people who are atheists would come at the idea of miracles and say, okay, miracles don't exist. Everything is the working of cause and effect. Forget about miracles. And that's sort of the approach. Dogen, being a Buddhist and being kind of obliged to acknowledge the traditional teachings of Buddhism, doesn't deny there are a few miracle stories here and there in Buddhism. They're not as prominent as the ones in Christianity, but they do exist. And he doesn't deny this. He kind of skirts the question of whether these are real or not, but he says these kind of miracles, to the extent that we believe they're real, can only take place within the great miracle. And the great miracle is this existence itself. So you can't, walk on water unless there is water and you to walk on it. So that implies that there's a greater miracle at work even than the sort of miraculous things that a lot of religions point to as sort of their foundational reason for being often, that there's this greater miracle of just plain existence. And as for superconscious states, in Buddhism, that's sort of regarded as the superconscious state is not something that you achieve in a moment of transcendence, although that does happen sometimes, that you have moments of transcendence or whatever like that. But it's that there is a working of something that's beyond your understanding, that is going on right here and right now, no matter what you're doing right here and right now, and that you kind of acknowledge and accept that without insisting that your personal self be necessarily involved in or aware of it. You just kind of accept that super consciousness is the basis of your individual consciousness. Kind of. I'm putting it in a funny way, but something like that.
I got it. And thank you, because, it seems like super consciousness is a real big topic right now, especially when we, kind of equate it also with miracles and how that relates to us and our consciousness as a whole. And it kind of brings me to my next question for you. In your book, you talk about Buddhas needing other Buddhas. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And the reason I brought it up is there is a chapter, again, of Dogen. I'm sorry to keep bringing him up, but it's called, my teacher translated it as Buddhas alone together with Buddhas. And it says Buddhas alone together, only Buddhas alone together with Buddhas realize the fundamental truth, something like that, something close to that. But there's an idea that we are both individual and that we are part of a collective, and that our collective aspect and our individual aspect are just two sides of the same coin, that we don't exist as a kind of isolated being, that we always exist in connection with others. So that what we are as individuals is kind of a reflection of how other people and other entities, dogs, for example, since I brought up my dog, perceive us, and their perception of us and our perception of them are really two sides of one coin that we accept and that we understand and acknowledge as being true. So Buddhas alone don't understand anything, but Buddhas alone together with Buddhas do. And people alone don't understand, but people alone together with other people and other entities can come to an understanding of reality that transcends any sort of individual understanding.
It seems like when we have community, we're able to really kind of dive into a deeper awareness of consciousness.
I think so. In Buddhism, always stresses the need for community. The three jewels are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And Sangha means the community of I was going to say practitioners. It's not necessarily practitioners. It's the entire human community, or even beyond just human community. It's the entire the entirety of the universe that we inhabit.
Well, that really has a big view when you look at it that way, and we're such a small piece to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got so much great information in this book. What do you want listeners to take away from your book?
I never know how to answer that question. I think I'm trying to put forward something that's important to me personally, that I think is probably important to other people. So I would like people to take a look at ethics and why ethics matter and what is the real basis for it. Because I think if I look at myself, I think in the past I've been too easy to accept that ethics comes from something outside of me. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that anything that I understand about ethics is also this kind of basis to my own being. I want to be ethical. And if we understand that we want to be ethical, I think we're more likely to just understand that we don't gain anything by being unethical. So we might as well just do the right thing.
It's kind of like ethics in action practice,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, my goodness, Brad, you've got such great books. I've always enjoyed talking with you. I know we've talked to you in regards to Hardcore Zen and some of your other books. Where can listeners connect with you, be part of your community, and learn more about your work?
Well, I have a blog at hardcorezen.info, which I keep up with as much as I can, but that also has connections where you can find my other stuff. And lately I've been pretty active on YouTube. So if you look up Hardcore Zen on YouTube, my channel is Hardcore Zen, youtube.com/Hardcore Zen. But if you just look up my name, Brad Warner, or Hardcore Zen, you'll find me on that a lot. And so I like connecting with people that way too.
Well, I've enjoyed your YouTube channel. Highly suggest everyone go and take a look at it. Brad, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Brad. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Other Side of Nothing, The Zen Ethics of Time, Space, and Being. The Other Side of Nothing is available to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And of course, support our indie bookstores, so go buy that book there. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.